So thank you all. So my name is Norm. I used to do RF stuff for about 15 years at NI and before. I learned all the things that I'm about to teach you and show you the very, very difficult way. I was not classically trained. If anybody in the room really likes looking at equations, like in Piotr's presentation, there will not be any equations because I didn't learn by looking at equations. I learned by playing with LabVIEW. And as the title implies, I basically almost failed out of college because of my signals and systems course. Anybody that went to Marquette, I think his name is Professor Johnson. Sorry about that. But in any case, in this presentation, we're going to talk about the complex polar relationship of U, J, and I. Practical DSP, we all failed in college or forgot along the way, but we should really try to understand. If anybody has epileptic seizures, looking at things going in and out, like from Piotr's, you're about to see a lot more zooming in and out as well. I will try to be kind for you. Now, in this presentation, in general, we're going to cover basically a master's course, and the intro of what you would need to learn and understand in a very short period of time. So don't think you're walking out of this knowing something. In fact, you're probably going to be more confused than you are right now, but you will ideally feel enabled to go deeper and feel like you actually have a better practical understanding of things, such as Fourier's dirty little secret about not needing extra samples for Nyquist, the idea of aliasing and what happens when you alias things. We're going to talk about the FFT and kind of how it works. That one's a little bit sloppy, but we're going to get through it. And then lastly, we're going to do some window shopping for better spectrums. So these are all topics that I know that I have spent time at NI teaching other engineers, talking with other engineers that are customers of NI, and very rarely do I run across somebody that actually really gets it, soup to nuts kind of understanding, especially even from a graphical representation. So without further ado, I'm going to lead you all across a river. There are many different ways to understand these topics. If you like equations, or if you like this notation or that notation, I can't cover all the different ways to get across this river. But if you let me lead you, I will take you stone by stone through things that you can go back to, that you can trust once you get confused. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. Positive, negative, imaginary, windowing, hope. Let's at least just get back to those core building blocks. That's what we're going to try to hit today, are those core fundamental things that are stable that you can continue to build from. Now, granted, you can go off the course like that person is right there and kind of like a meander here. You could go up the stream and get your feet very wet, but there's a limited time and there's a limited knowledge base that I have because I'm a hack when it comes to all these things. And so I know how to get across the river and I know my stones, and hopefully you can all get there with me. So, starting up, Fourier's dirty little secret. I love this one so much. It's just fantastic. We all believe, right? Who here doesn't believe that graphic that we see on the screen? We see that graphic all the time. We tell people about it all the time. When we try to talk about time domain and frequency domain, that's a bunch of sinusoids all added up, right? But I'm sorry to tell you, that is false. Absolutely false. Because why does 1 equal 2? Let's look at this. We're going to get into the code here in just a second. But if I just kind of look right here, I can guarantee you this is a 74 cycles per second sine wave. Ignore the time axis for a second. I kind of junked that up. But there's 2. So if you're talking like atomic theory, right, the least common denominator, you can't get smaller than an electron, right, kind of thing. But why is there 2? If the sinusoid is the fundamental building brick, why when I put it through an FFT do I see 2 things? Okay, you should feel uneasy right now in a good way. Also, why is it that when we have the signal, it's the exact same signal that's zoomed in, why are we exactly at 0.5? I've got a magnitude of 1, right? So there must be 2 things. It must be comprised of 2 things. The sinusoid that we all know and love, and every freaking NI demo that we run at NI Connect, there's always a sine wave just there, right? There's something else at foot. So let's dive into that in just a little bit. Let's go to her, go to her, and go to, right? Get into the code, they always say. I said it to Darren earlier today. I want to see more code, right? So I run this VI. What is behind this VI? That's it, right? Samples, 1024, there's no real time base. You could say it's across a second, 1024 samples, whatever, right? But I have 74 cycles of a sinusoid. I'm going to FFT, And then there's my spectrum. There's nothing else happening here. Somebody stop messaging me on Discord. But indeed, right? This is no magic. We can all do this at home. And indeed, this is in GitHub. I haven't published it yet. I was trying to, but I got distracted by Piotr's amazing presentation about X-rays. So indeed, this is the exact same thing. So this is a better axis. It's in terms of 0 to 1 second. This is a zoom-in version of it. And of course, we have this other thing. What is this negative frequency thing that we're looking at there? Oh, that must be the imaginary frequencies. No, it's not imaginary frequencies. So what is it? So let's go ahead. Nope, not that. There we go. So let's go ahead and run this code real quick. I love to say when I teach RF, the signal is the signal is the signal. We are seeing multiple actually, especially if I get rid of this right here. Each one of those is a representation of the signal. Oh, sorry, hold on. I ran a demo rip. There we go. That makes more sense for you. Each one of those is a representation of the signal in the time domain, in the frequency domain, and on the good old-fashioned kindergarten number line, right? 0 in the middle, positive to the left, negative to the right, right? It's all the signal. It's just different ways of looking at the signal. But keep in mind, and of course, if I were to just kind of speed it up, we're going to see it go faster. Of course, if we bring it back down, it's going to go slower, all that stuff. But if you watch actually what happens in this section right here, right, of course, the behavior that we're going to watch, each one of those goes out, and they eventually come back in, right? But if there are two things, what does one thing look like? And you can kind of see that down here. What does that one thing look like? Well, let's look at that one thing that I had erroneously shown a moment ago. What is that? What is that thing? That is the quanta. That is the lowest common denominator when it comes down to a signal. The lowly rotating phasor. Fixed magnitude, fixed rotational rate, and an initial phase. Okay, well that's one of them. Okay, and you can see that is down here. That's the positive. I can kind of speed it up a little bit, make it more saucy here. There you go, half second. So what is that B vector that we have there? Well, let's go ahead and get rid of that. Get rid of A, look at B. It's the same thing, but it's going in the opposite direction. Now, anybody that walked in this room and I said the word negative frequency and you're like, hell yeah, that is really freaking good. Like, how do I make a sinusoid go negative? Because you're thinking about it in terms of hertz. But what's the old school radio, like on your old school AM radio, you used to tune into not 100.7 megahertz, you'd turn into 100.7 megacycles per second. The other unit of hertz that we normally don't say is cycles per second. And if I say negative cycles per second, and I show you that, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's just, Jeff DeBurr in the back had that exact same aha moment. Oh yeah, positive frequency, negative frequency. That makes sense. But your mind is going like, but where is that in the time domain? Well, don't forget, we're showing things on two separate axes at this point in time, right? It's a complex plane, or across the full Cartesian plane, not just a simple number line. But now look what happens when I add those two vectors together. Now I'm back to that original signal. So what is it? Which one is it? Is it a positive rotating vector and a negative makes that? Or does that make the positive and the negative? No, the signal is the signal is the signal. And it's different ways of conveying it. Of course, I could show it as a mathematical equation. And that would probably make, who likes math here? Who likes the math equations? Okay, we've got a few, okay. Sorry, I'm about to be sworn. How dare you not put the equation for Euler up here at the moment? And I appreciate that. Once again, I learned it the hard way, but I think there's a lot of us that have as well. All right? So once again, just to watch it, right? Yellow plus blue equals green, right? Even that, hey, color theory, it even works, right? So let's go ahead and look at it. All right, so that's in this two-dimensional plane, but what if we just have a signal and I just have some random data? All right, well, let's do that. I've got sine pattern. This bottom terminal is number of cycles, and so I have a random number of cycles going there, and I have a very fixed number of cycles going there to basically give me a random chunk of data. And what do? Well, I take that data, I put it into an FFT, and it tells me. The purpose of the FFT is to actually give me the definition of all of those rotating phasors. And look what happens when I do this. Come on. Yeah. Just watch it in its beauty. Right? All of those rotating phasors adding up that were created off of the output of the FFT. Once again, the FFT is giving me the definition of those phasors. What frequency are they rotating at? What's its magnitude and initial phase? Now I'll go ahead and run that again so we can all kind of watch it happen there. See, watch that blue dot over there and watch the yellow one over there. All right. And if you're like, well, let me zoom in a little bit and watch one of those, there you go. Watch that blue one down there. Blue and the semi-yellow one, right? Just rotate, right? This is what you're getting. This is your positive and negative frequencies, because it's a hell of a lot easier to talk about a negative frequency when you're not thinking about it in terms of sines and cosines, but you're thinking about it in terms of rotations per second of a rotating vector. Let's go, there we go. All right, perfect, right? And so, you know, color coding aside, there's different things that we can do on this, but that's a real signal. That's just a purely sampled signal with the positive and negative symmetrical things. Let's take something that's a little bit less symmetrical, like our founding fathers and creator of LabVIEW, Jeff Kodosky's face. If I were to go through here, and as I have already done, I've taken pixel points of Jeff's head, right? I take and I throw that, follow the bouncing wire here, right? Just do, 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 do. I do the FFT. That's it. And that tells me what? Anybody want to say, come on, make me happy. What does the output of the FFT tell me? The frequency content, but it tells me about the rotating vectors, right? It tells me how to reassemble that signal. So now if I go here and I run this, I can redraw Jeff's face point by point, rotating vector by rotating vector, as it goes through, and it does that exact same operation. And this isn't just sample versus time, this is complex data. Don't forget, I came from the world of RF. Everything is a complex number, but indeed, that is exactly what we've got. And all I had to do is take all my complex numbers, shove it into the FFT, and it gave me all of my rotating vectors out. I add them all up, I trace the tip of all of those things, and you get all those points. Now this is a manual, like I didn't give every single point of his face. It's pretty crude. Every dot that you see over on the right is actually what Norm dropped, but all things being equal, that's A equals B, and A is vector plus vector plus vector plus vector plus vector plus vector. You get the point. All right. I know it's mesmerizing, it's fantastic, but here's the real thing. Fourier's dirty little secret is that all signals can be described as a summation of complex sinusoids. The rotating vector is the complex sinusoid. And if you're still having what's a negative frequency? There's actually a great video out there. Nope, where is it? Is it gonna let me do it? There you go. Imaginary Numbers Are Real. It's a YouTube channel that's out there. They did a great job. They have this whole thing talking about the anti-apple. It's beautiful, it's fantastic. So get into that. Next up, Mr. Harry Nyquist. The myth that we've been told throughout the years is that your signal needs to look good to get all of the information out of it. So although we all believe Nyquist, oh yeah, FS over 2, what do we naturally always go to? Well, you should probably sample it 10 times, right? That's better, right? But of course, as you can tell, Harry's not so happy over there. No free samples for you, right? But the reality is that both of these at the top and the bottom are the exact same signal, right? I have a little indicator here, right? Signals equal. It is true. Hold on a second. Let's get back to the LabVIEW diagram. Let's see. Low sample. So here we go. What is my block diagram? I have 5 cycles and 8 cycles. 5 cycles and 8 cycles. One at 19 samples and one 10 times faster, right? Nothing crazy. Pretty rudimentary here. I'm doing the exact same operation, FFTs. I'm coming over here. I'm doing the same thing. I have to do like a little bit of floating point equivalency. But indeed, if those points are equal, then my signals should be equal. And indeed, you can see that boolean is indeed green, right? It is true. Now, one of the questions that kept getting raised up is like, well, wait a minute. What if I actually need to know, let's see if I can get in there. There we go. What if I need to know that peak? What if I really need to see and have that sample for that peak? Well, if all of your true signal content is within the sampled bandwidth, right? If you can assert that, then all I should actually need to do, a second here, I can take the output of the FFT, this is like the dumpy signal, this is the one that looks like junk, right? I can modify some of the samples of my FFT. Actually, I'm just zero padding, I'm putting zeros in the middle of the FFT, effectively expanding its bandwidth, right? Because if you're thinking about it in the frequency domain, what is every bit? If you sample faster, your FFT gets wider in frequency. So if I just add zeros in the frequency domain, I should get more points in the time domain when I do the inverse FFT, which is right there. So let's go see what happens when I probe. Custom probe, real double array probe, use that new feature in 25Q3 where I can, there you go. And when I run this, looky, looky, there goes cookie. Right? This waveform just turned into this, which now has 1,019 points on the other side, which technically speaking has more samples than even that up there. It's not magic. I talked to somebody last night, they're like, this shouldn't be possible, right? And I appreciate that level of confusion, absolutely, wholeheartedly. But it is absolutely possible, as long as you've sampled it well. So the fact is, not the myth, is that depending on your signal and situation, the situation needs to be, it's repetitive in nature, right? If you're looking for some weird transient that only happens once, this little technique ain't gonna fly, right? Because there's usually more spectral content than what you want. But if indeed it's a periodic signal, as most things that we take into consideration that you're gonna put in the FFT kind of are, all the relevant information can be ascertained from looking at that FFT and doing more processing on it. In fact, I've got a little bit of a graphic down here, right? This is at the core of it. What you have is a cheap instrument, right? It doesn't sample 10x what you want. But you throw that through a little bit of DSP. What did I do? I added zeros. We can all accept that on an array. And I did the inverse FFT. And if you blindly trust what the FFT does, you should blindly trust what the inverse FFT does, right? To some varying degree. And you can get what you want out without having to pay for a really expensive instrument on the other side. Right? Absolutely possible. So if I were to go here, and here's another thing that you're probably asking yourself in your head of like, well, wait a minute, Norm. Actually, I didn't even open up the examples. Hold on a second. Let me go here. Go ahead and run this here. Get rid of that probe. Right? These two, like the green signal itself, like that's our actual signal. Was it 4 cycles within time of 1 second, right? And if I showed you those samples, you would all feel comfortable, like, oh yeah, I sampled my signal. But the twist is you didn't sample, you don't see the green line, right? The green line is just what exists in nature. And you've sampled at the red, but your instinct is to go, oh, I must have screwed something up, is your instinct when you see that sampling. I didn't get all of my data, but you did. As long as that's the only thing in the bandwidth, nothing's aliased in. We're going to talk about aliasing in just a moment here. That's the next section. But at the core of it, you have all the information, even though it doesn't look like it. But the reality is that that is your overall signal. Once again, so you might say, well, wait a minute, Norm. What if there was something happening in between one of those samples? Well, if something was happening in between one of those samples that you cared about, that means that there's higher frequency content present in your signal, and you have to sample faster if you want something else in between those, right? Now, maybe you need the expensive instrument to go through, right, and go ahead and get those samples to figure out, is there anything spectrally that I need to be aware of aliasing? Once again, we'll talk about it here in just a brief moment. But at the core of it, this is a proper sampling. It's less than fs over 2. This is sampling at 10 samples per second. It's a 4 hertz signal. That makes sense to me. I can get the initial, actually I can, once again, the thing that we usually leave off is the phase, right? This actually, if I were to look at, like I'm only displaying the magnitude here, but if I were to show the phase component of it, it would illustrate that I'm at a phase, actually, sorry, that's not there, right there, right? If I looked at the phase component there, it would show that I have a phase, initial phase of 4 for that 4 hertz sine wave. I think it's 4. All right. How are we doing so far? I haven't seen too many heads pop, maybe 2 so far, so it's about to get worse. So, but the twist in your head as well, I'm just going to repeat this. The only way that your spectrum looks that way is if the samples are at those exact places, right? Even though it looks junky, the only reason that those samples exist at exactly those places is because exactly that signal exists. If it was different, it would be a different spectrum. And if it was a different spectrum, it wouldn't look like that in the time domain. Right? It's the signal's the signal, but these are two different representations that we're looking at. All right, more aliases than at a SPI convention. This will be a long time. But the myth, the thing that I will commonly hear people go up and down about is that I would interview people for the role of RF systems engineer. And of course, you'd ask, what happens when you're not sampling fast enough? And they're like, oh, yeah, your signal gets attenuated. It turns imaginary. It reflects, right? Yeah, I'd hear all these things that come from this fundamental understanding or misunderstanding that you think that things go weird when you don't sample fast enough. And I'm here to tell you that's not really the case. Now, this is going to move very fast, and we'll open this code in just a moment. But indeed, the green signal, as we had just looked at a moment ago, is the one that's just constantly increasing in frequency. But look at the behavior at that blue line, the actual samples. It's just doing this like ping pong back and forth from there to there to positive to negative, positive. Or it's not positive, negative, sorry. It's going forward and then going backwards, right? Now, there's a bunch of things I could talk about this based on the rotating vectors conversation we had, but we're kind of keeping everything real. But there's this question mark. Actually, that's probably a great place to pause it at. Let me see if I can roll it back. Actually, I'll just open the code. There we go. Right? So what's not happening with the blue when I go up and down, or when I'm sampling something not fast enough? What's happening? What is not happening to it? The thing that's not happening is the amplitude's not changing. Right? Now, there's some outlier cases like right at the edge. Don't worry about those. But like in the guts of it there, right? The amplitude's not changing. Guess what else isn't changing about the output of the FFT? Because really, at the code behind this, I'm not doing anything other than what we were just looking at a moment ago. Sine wave, FFT, right? So still no magic behind the scenes. Still just doing the same stuff that you could be doing on your laptop right now, right? I'm just sampling that green line at a lower rate. Keep it right there. Also, the thing that's not changing about it is the phase of that signal as well. Well, isn't that interesting? I actually have a proper reproduction of the individual signal, even though I haven't sampled fast enough. Now, granted, if there was a signal, sorry, I can do that, there. If there was a signal there, signal there, signal there, signal there, we'd end up with a bunch of little signals kind of peppered around here, right? So you have to make sure that there's nothing else in the spectrum, but those are called Nyquist zones. In fact, if I were to just change this over to 10 right there, you can actually see every last one of those Nyquist zones is at the FS over 2 kind of mark. See how it flips there? And you can almost think about it. If a friend of mine taught RF, he took a piece of paper and he just kind of turned it into a bit of an accordion, right? You fold there, fold there, fold there, fold there, and like, there you go. There's all of it. There's all the different Nyquist zones at multiples of S over 2, but you're still representing your sampled signal appropriately. You haven't lost anything. It's still the same signal. And if the thing that you're looking to get about that signal is like, oh, I want to know what its phase is, or its relative phase, but most of the time you want to know what the magnitude is. Well, it is a proper reproduction, as long as there's nothing else in the spectrum. And so you might be saying to yourself, well, Norm, this is reality. There's always something else in the spectrum. There's always something else there. Well, what could I possibly do? Well, some of you may have caught that down here in the bottom, I have a little thing called enable filter. And the minute I move it, you'll see that my samples now have gone away, because I only have a filter enabled between 20 and 30. 20 and 30 hertz right there. So now I'm employing some windowing, so there's the spectral spreading. We'll talk about windowing in just a moment. But if you look at that signal at the middle, it's the same amplitude. It still has the same phase. Is what you're trying to get by doing the FFT, because you're doing the FFT in the first place, right? You want to know the frequency, the magnitude, and the phase. That's what we're getting out of our FFT, as long as we know that the only signal present is between 20 hertz and 30 hertz. I'm sampling this signal at 20 cycles per second, but I am acquiring my FFT. Once again, my FFT is like, I'm just seeing that. Please ignore those side lobes for the moment. But what amplitude is this at? This is at the right amplitude of 0.5. Here, I'll put that to 1. There you go. So I'll go and turn that back on. So I know this is dizzying, and it's okay that it's dizzying for the moment. And I'm moving around very quickly. But this code is going to be available for you to also go through and download. But it is that twist. And the thing to remember in the lie to suppress is that actually, is it right there? There you go. Actually, another story is these are all the radio stations in Austin. I'm an RF guy. I've got a software-defined radio. I usually have 2 or 3 of them on me at a given point in time. I've got 2 in my bag. I'm recording the radio stations of Austin right now, doing GPU processing. Piotr, we need to talk about GPU versus FPGA. But indeed, I can guarantee you that station 90.5, let me see if I can get this right there, right? Watch this section of the spectrum at 90.5. That's like our local NPR station. Look at that noise floor jump up and down. I can guarantee you the people at the FCC would raise holy hell if the noise floor at 90.5 was bouncing up and down like that. That's a lot of interference for a local radio station. That's not good. But what that is, even though I'm looking at a signal at 100 megahertz, is my 2.4024 gigahertz Wi-Fi aliasing in on top of my signal. The signal, even though it's orders of magnitude away, well, like an order of magnitude away, right? 100 megahertz, 2 gigahertz, right? Pretty close, rough. It's still showing up in band because I'm not filtering it out, right? The signals don't disappear just because they're like way out there. So all of this act of aliasing is very interesting, and you can take advantage of it, but you also need to apply this is why understanding that the signals don't go away and why actual analog filtering is needed to suppress those out-of-band signals, because you will still sample them, right? If we go back to that green sine wave that we were showing, even though I wasn't sampling fast enough, the voltage is still there. When you take your sample, it still shows up. So you must be aware of that, and you can either harness it or try to avoid it from happening in the first place. All right. Next up. How are we on overall time? 2:15, 2:25. Oh, we might have a lot of time for questions. All right. So fun facts together about the FFT, right? You don't know if you saw that right there. There's Fourier running very fast, right? So first off, it is not the Fourier transform. I think he might have a slight offense to everybody calling him the Fourier. But it's Fourier. I think Piotr slightly mentioned it a little bit differently a moment ago. But yeah, so there you go. There's your first fact about it. The Fourier transform is the real meat of what's happening. It is the decomposition of samples into frequency components. And we just say FFT all the time, like everybody understands, like that's the thing. I mean, FFT is the fast Fourier transform is very, very cool. Of course, as you see there, it has butterflies associated with it, interestingly enough. And you can go and look online for how that works. It's very elegant. I'm not going to get into the fast part of the Fourier transform, but indeed, that is how that works. The other thing that's very interesting is the number of points into the FFT equals the number of points out of the FFT. So if you just think about that one for a second, what happens normally when you're working with your spectrum, right? You want to, if you want to see more points in between your points, right? If I'm sampling and I can only see a tone every 1 kilohertz, right? And you want to see it every hertz, what do? Well, you put more samples into the FFT. But how do you do that? Do you sample faster? No, you sample longer. Sample for a longer period of time. One of these similarly so, if you want to have more points in between the points in time domain, or if you want your spectrum to be wider, right? If your spectrum has 1,000 points, but you would like for it to go wider, well, you can just start sampling faster within the same time frame. Number of points in equals the number of points out. You have 2 levers. I'm either going to increase the amount of time that I throw into the FFT or the number of samples per second into the FFT. Of course, you could do both of them and it will have a similar impact overall, but those are the 2 major levers that people tend to get kind of twisted up on. And I just say like, well, if you want a finer grain FFT or spectrum, really, what do? Well, if I just want finer, I just sample for a longer period of time. It gives me that finer grain resolution. And when we talk about windowing in just a moment, it'll look like that. And only describes the signal. Yes, and that's the other thing too, is that when I took the FFT of Jeff Goodell, so this is going to be okay. When I took the FFT of Jeff Kadosky's face, it was not describing what was happening between each one of those points. If you kind of watched it happening on that black background one, it was like it was hopping, the end point was hopping between each one of those resolved frequency plots. I have no idea what was happening in between those points, but indeed it was just connecting all of those lines in a very interesting way. So the thing to walk away from all of these facts, one of them is very interesting, to give you an instinctual feel for what the FAST4 or the Fourier transform is doing. It is a bank of parallel filters. In ChatGPT, image creation is amazing, and I love it so much. But yes, it is a bank of parallel filters, right? So you put your entire time domain signal into the blue box, right? You have to do that. The Fourier transform doesn't really work one point at a time. You got to take a time-sampled period, you shove it into the algorithm, and the act of what the FFT does is indeed taking all of that and running it through this filter, that filter, that filter, that filter. Everybody has their own unique frequency that they're resolving, and they're giving back to you the average amplitude of that signal for that entire time frame. So let's look at what that looks like. And everybody's about to gasp. And it's lovely. I love it. Just every time I do it, I'm like, oh, there we go, right? I guess we just saw a presentation. Sometimes you got to do this on FPGAs. This is host. But what I want to show you here is that indeed I have my signal that's upstream. I don't know if it's going to show. Let's see if I can do it there. There you go. For reference, if you ever wanted to create a rotating phasor, the definition of a rotating phasor is very simple. It has an amplitude and it has a ramp for the phase versus time. Right here, this is a rotating phasor that we've got. So a lot of this is just to create the signal. Don't get distracted by that so much. Go ahead and get distracted by the egregious number of individual wires that I had to manually drop on the diagram. But I wanted to show you that the output of the FFT is going to give me a spectrum, as usual, and I've taken that exact same signal and I've run it through a bank of parallel filters. Each of them is, if I scroll down here, you can probably intuit the math a little bit. That's the 0 from 0 to whatever. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on each one of those wires just to drive home the point of them all happening in parallel. And so when I run this, and I'm going to go ahead and run continuously, and I'm going to go ahead and change this to be, let's change this to a 40% on. Ignoring, once again, those sideband aspects of it, and I can go ahead and even offset this a little bit. You'll see nothing changes. Ignoring some of those sideband, what's the amplitude right here? 0.4, or 40%. My waveform is only active for 40% of, my wave, hold on a second, let me just turn that off, sorry. There we go, that's better. And I can do that right there. It's gonna work. There we go, all right? My waveform is only active for 40% of the time. If I were to make this indeed 100% of the time, you'll see that that value now spikes to 1. And why am I showing you this? Well, don't forget, what did I just say? It's a bank of parallel filters. And every one of those filters resolves to the average value of that specific frequency versus time. So if that frequency is only present for 80% of the time, you'll see that it indeed goes to 80. Now this is the FFT, but let's go ahead and zoom out just a second here, and you'll see it is a perfect replication or reproduction. There we go, reproduction. That's got to be a word. Cupstrum's a word. If Cupstrum's a word, reproduction has to be a word. In any case, both of them, the parallel filters in the bottom and the FFT up top, are resolving to the same values. All the FFT is doing is telling me the average power versus time, or average volt, or average amplitude. It doesn't know anything about voltage. And then what am I doing here? I'm merely saying, what is the mean of that? And then I take the magnitude, because it's a complex number that comes out of the FFT. I think I skipped over that point as well. Every time that you've done an FFT or you've looked at a spectrum before, there is an implied phase that has also come out of the FFT. It just happens to be the vast majority of the time when we're looking at a spectrum, we kind of ignore the phase. Now, for anybody in RF and wants to see the group delay of a signal through a system, like phase matters, have no doubt, but probably 80% of the time, we're just staring at the magnitude of a spectrum. And that's all that I'm doing. Every last one of those points for the parallel filters is just a point of the average through going through the filter, looking at the magnitude of that complex number. And you can see that indeed they are 100% aligned in that. So hopefully that gives you, once again, a more instinctual feel. That's the purpose of all the things that we're going through, is so that you're like, all right, I didn't exactly understand, like, why is it? Once again, all the spreading that we're talking about, we're going to see some really wild illustrations here in a moment. But if you're just talking about the frequency, the specific frequency of interest, the one that's at the middle, right? It is perfectly resolving in both of those cases to what it is. And in fact, all the other ones are replicated as well. All right. Let's see, for the sake of time. This goes to when again? 2:20. All right. No, I'm going to... I will take one question. I will take a question from someone bold enough to ask. I've got lots of illustrations. No? All right, well, I'm going to give you one that you didn't ask for then. Fine. See, you're never going to make that mistake again. So, indeed, what is a complex polar relationship? When a big white bear and a penguin fall in love. You know? No, the complex polar relationship that we are all talking about here indeed is the signal's the signal, the signal. It can be represented in different ways in terms of sines and cosines. What is the representation of a rotating phasor? You can say and look at it as we have seen here. You can look at sines and cosines, and anybody that wants to create their own signals on the fly, good luck using sines and cosines and trying to remember what a negative frequency is. Right? It's like, do I put the sine before the cosine? Is the sine inverted? Oh. But what about if I just merely represent my rotating phasor, hold on a second here, let's do that right there, as a line and a ramp. Because don't forget, what is this, right? Other than a really awkward move, right? What is the phase of my arm as it goes around? It's just constantly increasing. Of course, there's the 2 pi wraparound, but let's just go get real, imaginary for the moment, right? It is just a constantly increasing line. And what happens if I want that to go faster? How can I make a rotating vector go faster? Well, in this case, actually, I'm going to screw up my screen here in a second if I'm not careful. There we go. I can just make that ramp go steeper, right? I change my phase faster in a given time. I zip around faster. How do you make a negative frequency with a rotating phasor using polar notation? Well, crap, I'll just go like that, and I'll make the phase go down. Oh, that was a heck of a lot easier to remember how to make a rotating phasor at a very specific rotational rate, at a very specific direction, merely by giving into polar notation and let go of your sines and cosines. Right? It's not that they don't exist. It is not an inappropriate representation. You can go that route, but sure as heck, I like creating things with that notation a lot more. And even more so, I think I've got it right here, right? I don't know who in the audience remembers what happens when you multiply this signal times the same thing. Does anybody remember like first inner outer, last will be like 2 times cosine times sine and cosine squared and negative sine squared. Does anybody remember all those trigonometric identities? Like how you actually do the math of that one? It's dizzying, to say the least, but it's not inaccurate. You see it all throughout math books. However, there's the concept of exponential phasor notation or Euler's notation. And I can tell you right now that this signal up top here, if I do my job right, there we go, has a magnitude, has a frequency, and it has a phase. But in order to manipulate this signal with other signals, you've got to remember all those trigonometric identities. Well, the exponential notation has, indeed, a magnitude, a frequency, and an initial phase. Well, if anybody remembers, it is a hell of a lot easier to remember those exponential identities than it is to remember all of those trigonometric sines and cosines and 1 minus cosine squared times 2 and all the other ins and outs. At least so say I, right? And so ideally, as once again, you're confused, that's okay. But as you get into this reality of it all and you want to work with signals and try, okay, Norm convinced me I should be less afraid. I'm going to play a little bit here, right? Given to the reality of if I just work in polar notation, life gets easier. And guess what? If you're working in LabVIEW, life gets easier too. Because guess what you don't get in most languages? you don't get a complex data type, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure MATLAB does. I'm sure if maybe there's a data set, I mean, I'm sure we got Python. Was it pandas have a complex data type? Okay, I got a nodding head. Okay. Well, we've had it for longer. There you go. That's my claim, right? But the reason that it ends up mattering a little bit more as well is because all of those little transforms of going between complex and polar notation by having complex numbers as a first-class citizen as opposed to two separate values, and you've got to remember, is it inverse tangent of the thing or is it negative sign? We give you the transforms. Isn't that nice, right? And they're hyper-performant as well, right? This is made to work at breakneck speeds at the host, at real time, and even on FPGA, right? The lab, don't forget, you are all LabVIEW programmers, right? My evangelization here, where's my, need my LabVIEW for Everyone book up here, just to beat on the Bible, right? Right? You are all wicked dangerous. You are working with a tool that allows you to adapt to many, many different domains, like what Piotr is just showing, or just purely mathematical stuff on the desktop. That's really, really powerful in a lot of different ways. This is one simple illustration of it. Whether or not you work with complex numbers matters not. But all of that in many different ways, all these signal processing libraries, it's huge. It's massive. And you've got that at your fingertips because you're LabVIEW developers, or aspiring LabVIEW developers, hopefully. All right. Go here. We went through that. That was a hidden slide. Let's see. All right, back to bank of parallel filters. All right, we're pretty good. So now I'm going to throw everything at you, including the kitchen sink, right? There's at least a couple groans in the audience. Fantastic. All right, for those of you who didn't realize, and I'm going to have to do some kibitzing on the panel here. I just blanket ran out of time, so just bear with me. 7, run that, turn that off, and I'm going to turn off a bunch of plots. Let's see, I'm going to use the blue one. And this is going to get kind of dizzying, but I'm going to do the best that I can. All right, so I have a signal that I have created underneath the hoods that is exactly at 7 cycles per period, right? It's exactly perfectly sampled. And now I've done the FFT of that signal, right? And so what comes out of it, indeed, let me go ahead and even get, is that signal right there, right? And if I were to increase, let me go ahead and just run this again here. And I'm going to go ahead and increase it to 8, right? You're just going to see, right? This is the output of the FFT. I guess I could kind of maybe even go down to 0 here. And the x-axis, there you go. So I can change my actual tone frequency. So don't get wrapped around the axle because I didn't make it large enough for you. My mistake. But right, that's the output of the FFT. But that's perfectly called coherent sampling. I have a perfect number of absolutely 7 cycles of a 7 hertz waveform going into the FFT. So what happens when I am a little bit off? Because that never happens, right? You can always coherently sample everything, except when you really can't, right? Oh, holy crap, what just happened right there? Why? What are all these other parts of the FFT that just came out of the woodwork? Well, you remember a few moments ago I said that the FFT is a bank of parallel filters. But as you know, no filter is perfect. Every filter has a bandwidth. Every filter has a shape, right? And so the default behavior of the FFT, the shape of the filter, as you may have intuited by the nature of the title here. Actually, I guess I can just turn that one down. Right? It's the sync pattern. Now, the sync pattern is very unique in its nature, and we can go back and forth between the time and frequency duality, and there's a lot of stuff that could be said, but I'm going to avoid. I'm going to try to go, once again, more instinctual at the moment, right? And once again, that's the signal overall. So why, if I have a sinusoid that's perfectly, where am I at here? It's 7.5 hertz, right? It's immediately in between each one of those bins. Well, why is it that when I'm directly at 7, that all of those other bins disappear? Well, look at the zeros of that sync. This is the power spectrum of the sync pattern, right? Well, they're all at 0. So whenever there is something exactly in the middle of those other bins, nothing shows up in my bin. However, let me go ahead and illustrate something else right here. Turn that one down. This is probably better. Why is there nothing showing up here? Why is there no amplitude showing right there? Because any power that is exactly at this 0 spot disappears, right? It doesn't show up in the filter. Remember what I did? What did I do after I filtered in that LabVIEW block diagram? I took the average value after going through the filter, and I took the power. But the average of that signal going through the pink filter is 0, right? It has a perfect null at that other offset. But the moment that I slightly go away from it, let me go ahead and change this up a little bit. There we go. Maybe a little bit of a zoom in here. There we go. See if I can do this. Right? Right. Look at that pink arrow. Look at the white dot. The white dot is where how much power makes it through the filter, right? Because I'm looking in the frequency domain, right? The shape of the filter in the frequency domain is a sink. And so as that filter, just look at that. I mean, it's the white. There's a perfect white line that goes between those things. And so because of the shape of that filter, whenever I'm not perfectly at one of those nulls, I will always end up with some power resolving into that pink filter. You're like, well, wait a minute. What about all the 5 minutes? Okay, that's fine. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go, got to make sure I don't screw this up. Window minus. There we go. Perfect. Right? Now you might say, well, there's this thing called windowing that we can talk about, which I'm going to do in the remaining 5 minutes here. But indeed, maybe the more important thing is to realize that each one of those bins has a given filter. And so if I were to really, really zoom in on this, you could draw a straight line between, well, there's from there to there. Where's the purple one, right? My purple one's from there to there. My blue one goes from there to there, right? There's my signal is represented by this vertical red line that you can see right there, right? And so all of the other filters are non-zero there. So that means that all of my other bins will see some of the power from my signal. Now it gets interesting when I go ahead and I use a window, because if I use a window, and let's go ahead and turn off some of those other parallel filters that we're looking at there. Go back to that pink one, and I will choose a Hanning window. And I will get this centered a little bit more. Bear with me. Said this one was a little bit more rough. All right. Now at this point in time, you might say, well, Norm, I'm still seeing power in adjacent bins. It didn't make it perfect. And I agree with you. It did not make it perfect. We're going to see a visualization in a second. But notice what happened in all those other bins. And this is like hyper zoomed in, right? It's massively suppressed. They're way, way, way down. The shape of the filter, once you apply windowing, changes. So that non-coherent sampling, non-perfect sampling of a signal now no longer bleeds like what you were looking at before. There. I don't know, I keep looking at my watch. It has a battery. It's kind of funny how that works, right? All right, so Mr. John Tukey, basically one of the creators of the window. The myth is that you window a signal so that you can see two tones closer to each other. And a bonus myth is that picking a Hanning window is just good enough for everybody out there in the world. But the truth is, in various ways, is that the windowing is a time domain operation that destroys the time domain. It's actually destructive. You're actually mushing up of it in a bad way in order to yield the better frequency domain result. And so the visualization that I've got a very small time to go through, right? So here is a perfectly coherently sampled signal. I'll go ahead and leave that run right there. And you can see the dynamic range on each of these is massively huge. It goes from 410 decibels, which is crazy sauce. And if I just very barely cycle off, they both go crazy. So it's like, okay, well, Norm just told me that there's this windowing thing that I can do. So I'm going to go ahead and employ a window here, and that's going to make everything better. It's like, well, hold on a second. Let's look at a couple things first. Let's go ahead and get it back to exactly, well, I'll make it 15 cycles. There you go. And you might say, like, well, wait a minute, Norm. Here's a perfect signal with two perfect spikes for two perfect tones. Why would I ever make it look sloppy like what I'm looking at here? That doesn't make sense. Especially that's with an easy window. Use something like a flat top. Holy heck. Let's do Gaussian. right? That looks way, way, way worse. But let's take that y-axis and put it to something more respectable, like 100 dB. Okay, well, it still looks sloppy. Let's go ahead and add some noise. It's still not so great, but let's go ahead and off-tune by just a little bit. Okay. Maybe that makes a lot more sense. That windowing, although it spread the power from an individual frequency to some adjacent bins, it allows me to resolve more of the spectrum. Not just because there's two tones that are close to each other. I couldn't do squat with that top spectrum, right? It does not give me any visual illustration. I need some form of windowing in order to see that. And that's, once again, that's a dumpy one. If I went to Hanning, it's going to only do the 3 bins, or Hanning up top, right? It's going to get better, and of course I can off-tune here and kind of do one of those numbers. So then the question is like, well, if I've got a filter or a thing right here, it's really, really fat, but I want my bins to be very, very close together. I still want to resolve those frequencies very close. Well, maybe you can do something in the last minute of this that I probably don't have. Here is 2 tones, and you can see like, well, I guess that bottom one looks sort of better. I can see the kind of the noise floor. But remember, one of those things about the spectrum and taking spectral analysis is it should be repetitive in nature. So what if I just acquire a couple more cycles of that waveform? Now I'm having more bins per frequency point, but that's okay. But now I'm resolving it. I still don't have the nice, pretty, perfect spike to an individual frequency, but I sure as heck can do a heck of a lot more with what I'm staring at there. And the last point to make, because this is such a great image and meme, is that a much better realistic representation of your signal is way better than a slight deformation of an ideal spectrum that you never really see. Yeah. So clear as chocolate milk, right? Yeah, I was going to say, you're watching now, right? So summary, rotating phasers are fundamental, not complex. Treat 10x sampling like training wheels. You don't really need it in most situations. It's like a warm blanket. Fear aliasing of signals and filter them out, or figure out how to master aliasing, and you can do some really, really neat stuff. The FFT acts like a bank of parallel and shaped filters, and windowing shapes your spectrum so you can have better spectrum results. It's a time domain operation to see a better spectrum. And lastly, experiment and learn. You're walking away, your minds are melted, I understand, that's okay. But the twist is you have a very powerful language. It's not funny, it's true. I just don't get the humor behind it. It's like only the NI people are laughing at me, which is great. Thanks, guys. Makes me feel wonderful, right? But the reality is that experiment and learn. You have one of the most powerful languages built on the planet at your disposal to do all of this processing, dinkering around with it, and to get better with it. Because when you do, you're a more wicked engineer, more wicked test engineer, and also you help LabVIEW show off all that much more, and I think we all like that. So thank y'all.